69th session of the Commission of the Status of Women will take place at the United Nations headquarters in New York from the 10th to the 21st of March, 2025. This year marks 30 years since 189 countries unanimously adopted the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action on Gender Equality at the Fourth World Conference on Women held in Beijing in 1994. The international community came to a consensus and agreed to a comprehensive blueprint of commitments supporting the full development of women and their equality with men in 12 areas of concern. This year, then, is a pivotal year for feminism, a time to fight for women's and girls' rights, demand gender equality, and insist on balancing power structures so everyone has an equitable chance in the world. The ICJW represents women from across the globe and from all walks of life. And tonight I have the exclusive privilege of interviewing Sara Winkowski, past president of the ICJW, vice president of the World Jewish Congress, and member of the executive of the Latin American Jewish Congress. She's also a member of the Board of Governors of B'nai Brit International and advisor to the International Women's Council of Jews and Christians. Her CV is extensive, but we'll focus only on the issue for discussion. Welcome, Sara. It's such a privilege to be able to interview you. We're delighted to have you here. Thank you for joining us. And we would very much like to start off by your history with the ICJW. Briefly, when you started, what it was that appealed to you, and let's hear this fantastic story.
Thank you so much, and hello to everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. I started with ICJW when I was a young girl because my mother was the founder of the Uruguayan Council of Jewish Women in 1967. So I started then. Then with my family, we moved, with my husband, my children, we moved to Peru. And from there, we moved to Kenya. So I didn't work too much with ICJW then. In Kenya, I became more inside ICJW because we had the Women's Conference, United Nations Women's Conference in Nairobi, 1985. And even though I was not a delegate, I was with Lila Siegel and June Jacobs and Stella Rosan, the oldies, I would say, the founders of this wonderful organization. And when I was in Nairobi, my mother sent me a letter saying, you know what? We are going to translate the newsletter into Spanish. And I said, great. At the time, I was a translator at UN. And I asked my mom, who's going to do it? Oh, these two friends, they know something of English and they can do it. So to make it short, the first newsletter took them 1 year to get it translated and printed and send it. So I said, Mommy, this is enough. I'm going to do it for you. And that's how I started becoming involved with ICJW. My mom would send the newsletter to Kenya. I would do the translation, type it over, send it back to Montevideo, and they would have it printed. Of course, there was no email at the time. It took some time, but it didn't take 1 year. So when we came back from Nairobi and Helen Mar was going to be the next president, I went to a meeting in Mexico, met her, started talking with her, and she said, I want you to be in the international, not the national one. And so that's how I got involved. Then Lila Siegel invited me to go to the environmental conference in Rio de Janeiro in '92. And my next big event was Beijing.
Well, I mean, that sounds fascinating. I wish we had time to go into it in much more detail. I would love to hear it, and so would everybody else. But the focus really tonight is on the Women's World Conferences. Now, I noticed that you did do one in Nairobi and Beijing. Won't you tell us about those particularly? Because they're going to come onto the Beijing Plus 30 meeting that's going to be held.
Okay, in Nairobi, I was not part of the delegation because they could only have 10 delegates. And of course, there was no space for me. So I became a delegate with B'nai B'rith. But the good thing is that I knew everybody in Kenya, all the ambassadors, they knew I was Jewish. In Kenya, we had Zionism is equal to racism, you remember. And so the ambassadors used to give me the, I'm trying to think of the words, English is not my language, of the resolutions that they were going to present. And I took that resolutions to Lila Siegel, who was the president of ICJW. So they knew beforehand. I always said I was like a detective trying to take things from one place to another. And it did help. We worked very hard. I mean, they worked very hard with WITSO at the time. Evelyn Summers, who is now in the World Jewish Congress, was the delegate of WITSO, and they tried to work together, trying to see how they could counter, how do you say, counterquote, this Zionism is equal to racism. And I'll tell you an anecdote because this is funny to know. They were talking who is going to speak in the name of the Jewish women. They didn't get they didn't agree who was going to do it, if Lila Siegel or Evelyn Summers. So B'nai B'rith, who had a man, said, I'm going to speak for the Jewish women. And that's what happened. The Latin American Jewish Congress to go to Peru for an executive meeting and to deliver a speech on Jewish women's leadership. So we were sitting in the front. At that time, I already was vice president of the World Jewish Congress. And there is a gentleman who is introducing the people sitting at the front table. So he says, Mr. So-and-so, president of the Peruvian Jewish community, Mr. Tenenbaum, CEO of the Latin American Jewish Congress, Mr. Saul Hilvich, treasurer, and then it was my turn, and he just jumped, and he went to the rabbi, and he said, and the rabbi. And there I was sitting, just thinking, what do I do? He absolutely ignored me. And I'm the speaker. And because I'm a woman. So luckily, it was Saul Hilvich, who was the treasurer of the Latin American Jewish Congress, who said, and we want to welcome Sara Winkowski, etc., etc. So as you see, as a woman, I really went through a lot of inconveniences, if I may use that word.
Were you in Beijing in 1994? And if so, can you give us your feelings about what must have been one of the most remarkable unions of women from across the world?
Yes, I was there. I was invited by Lila Siegel to be part of the delegation. And I already knew what I was going for because I had been in Nairobi. So I knew what this meant. 50,000 women in Wairau. We were not official, we were NGOs, so we were not really in Beijing. We were all sent to a city called Wairau, which was about, I don't know, maybe 30 miles away from Beijing. And we used to go in buses back and forth to the big meeting. It was, I knew where I was going, but it was fascinating. 50,000 women all together fighting for women's rights. And then it was Hillary Clinton who came out saying, women's rights are human rights, and human rights are women's rights. And there were a lot of jokes going around saying, look, we have had such a terrible, since the world is a world, men have been in power. Look what a disastrous world we have when women are in power, because we're mothers, sisters, daughters, and we have a different way of negotiating things. The world will be much better. 30 years later, I would say it is not, but we are coming to the point. Women slowly, as they say in Swahili, pole pole, they are walking very slowly, trying to get to complete our goals. What we thought, what we wanted, and what we fought for since Mexico. It was Mexico, it was Copenhagen, Nairobi, and Kenya. Okay, so I'm a little disappointed that we haven't gone much farther. But as they say, the little drop slowly makes a hole in the rock. And that's what I'm saying now, that slowly, pole pole, we are getting where we wanted to be.
Where exactly did you want to be?
Well, what I want is gender equality. Gender equality in every aspect of life. We need equal salaries for equal work, which we don't have. We need equal number of women leaders, and that has been always a problem, especially in the Jewish community all over the world, because there is this feeling that money makes a leader, and money doesn't make a leader. A leader is something else. So, and I will tell you something which is really very, very gratifying for me. I have always fought for women's rights and women's leadership. Anyway, when I started in the World Jewish Congress in 2004, and when we had our first convention in Johannesburg, remember, I think it was 2009, if I'm not mistaken, I went to the World Jewish Congress. We had a meeting there, and I asked for the floor, and I asked the president, can we have a letter of support to ICJW because of the work we are doing with women in Aguna? And they looked at me like, are you crazy? Who are you? Where do you come from? Today, in 2025, which is only 14 years ago, the World Jewish Congress has a commissioner on gender, just formed a new committee on Alliance for Women, which means that we have gone forward. And the Latin American Jewish Congress has a new document, has also a commissioner on gender equality, and they are making the presidents of all the Latin American communities sign a document saying we are going to promote women's leadership. And already Chile signed the document, and they now have a woman president of the Jewish board of directors. And Uruguay just signed the document. I don't know when they are going to have a woman, but they are little steps forward, which is gratifying.
Not only gratifying, Sarah, it's remarkable. And you know, hats off to you and all the other women who fought so hard for that. And yes, there is still a long, long way to go. But, you know, as you said, a little drop makes a hole in a rock, and that hole gradually grows. Sarah, can you tell me the most, possibly very briefly, the most consequential issues you got out of the UN Women's Conferences?
One of my experiences in Beijing as a Jewish woman. You know, I lived in Peru, I lived in Kenya. I was very far away from my community. Uruguay has a small population, a small community, but a very Zionist community, very much for Israel. And when we were in Beijing, they sent the word was gone around. Friday, we are having Shabbat in such and such a room, and we were 50 Jewish women, and they really went on with the service. And to have these 50 Jewish women in Beijing, in Beirut, on a Shabbat, all together, singing Am Israel, it was very, very touching. And I really felt it very, very inside me, that I belong to a people. I belong to something. And we Jewish people are always together.
Really been wonderful. I have the utmost admiration for all the women of the ICJW, and you are a legend in your own time. Is there anything you would like to end off with?
I just wish for the best to ICJW. You know, ICJW started by the end of 1890 with women, American women and German women, very much concerned about the young girls that were coming out from the little Städtelach, the little towns, and going into prostitution. I'm in a committee at the UN that deals with trafficking, and we still have the same problem. So I do wish that we will somehow overcome all these problems for women. But with the work of all of us, we will go on and we will climb up to where we really want to be.